We have a saying at Vistage, and I'm sure you've heard this, hire slowly, fire quickly. And everybody does the reverse. They fire slowly and they hire quickly. And I always tell people, whether you have openings or not, you should always be interviewing.
Welcome to Confessions of a Vistage Chair. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We have real, behind-the-scenes conversations with Vistage Chairs who share honest stories and practical insights on leadership growth, peer advisory groups, and what actually happens in Vistage meetings. Let's pull back the curtain. Dick, I'm very excited to have you on today and talk about, you've got quite some time in the Vistage ecosystem, which I'm sure has given you a ton of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it has. I always say to people that I probably learn as much or more being a Vistage Chair as my members do.
That's all. And how do you get into this? Like, how did you 25 years ago stumble into Vistage, and this seems like my passion?
Well, I was in the broadcasting industry for over 30 years and got fired shortly after 9/11. And we were living in Pittsburgh. My wife and I are originally from the Philadelphia area, and we had moved to Pittsburgh from Miami. But anyway, I got fired after 9/11. And at that point decided that I was done with the broadcasting industry. It had become much more banker controlled, I guess is the best way to put it. And it wasn't a fun industry anymore, at least not for me anyway. And we decided we wanted to stay in Pittsburgh. Our son at the time was about 7 years old. And we didn't want to move him. We had moved him a few times already. And I started doing a lot of networking. And through the networking, I got some opportunities to do some, I guess you'd call it consulting, working with founders of companies who were great at founding a company, but really didn't know how to run a business. So I was doing that. And then through my networking, I met a gentleman who I got to know pretty well. And he called me one day and he said, "Have you ever heard of TEC?" Which, as you probably know, is the original name of Vistage, stood for the executive committee. And I had never heard of TEC. I wish I had, to be honest with you, but I had never heard of it. He said, "Well, you should check them out." He said, "Because they're doing the kind of work that you do, but on a much larger scale, obviously." So I did. I went online, checked them out. I called their San Diego office, which is their headquarters. I spoke to a woman who kind of interviewed me. I went through a series of interviews and then was invited to come to chair training in San Diego. And I was told by somebody that whether I decide to become a chair or not, if I'm invited to chair training, I should go because it's world-class training, and I would take it with me no matter what I do. So I had already decided that I was going to do this because I love the mission, and I love the fact that I was not going to be an employee. We're all 1099s. We're all contractors. Anyway, long story short, I went to the training. It was world-class, no question about it. And that was in June of 2003, and came back and started going back to my network and getting leads and referrals, and eventually in November of 2003, launched my first group with 8 members.
I was talking to Mark Taylor last week, and he was like, "I've never sweat so much through an interview." Was it that arduous when you were going through the process as well?
I'm not sure if it was arduous. Part of the interview was actually a videotape interview, where I was told in advance that I would have to do a role play, not knowing what a chair really does, but I have to do a role play. Well, it turns out that the interviewer who was videoing me had me do, I think, 4 or 5 role plays, which I was not prepared for. But I got through it. So I guess I sweated a little through that, but I got through it. And actually, he's the one who said to me, "Go for the training." And a couple of days after that was the final interview. A couple of days after that interview, I did get the call from TEC inviting me to come to training.
And is there anything like when you heard that the training was world class, and I realized this was a couple decades ago. Is there anything that like stood out to you and like that stuck with you to this day that came from that training?
Yeah, I think the thing that really continues to stick out with me, and I talk to new chairs about this, is the fact that when you're a Vistage chair, it's never about you. It's all about the member, and you have to kind of step back and let the member be the what should I call the number one attraction, so to speak. I think that was really an important thing to learn because when you're doing a one-to-one with a member, I think you have to really keep that in mind because you're there to help them and to help them steer their way through whatever issues they're dealing with, uh, not to tell them what they should do. And that's the toughest thing I think any new chair has to deal with is your immediate response is that when they have an issue is you want to solve it for them. Um, and my wife told me many, many years ago after we were first married, when she would come home from work with an issue, and I would immediately begin to solve it. I'm sure you can relate to this. Uh, Finally, she said to me one day, she says, I'm not looking for an answer. I just want someone to listen.
Yeah.
So you have to really sharpen your listening skills when you're a Vistage chair. Fortunately, my wife helped me start doing that.
I love it. And you talked about like how quick you were able to put this first group together. Is the consulting that you were doing, and it sounds like you were even before tech, now Vistage, you were networking and building kind of that ecosystem for yourself. Was that one of kind of the keys to success or early success and traction for you once you got back and started to put it together?
Absolutely. I immediately, excuse me, went back. I talked to a number of people in that network before I went to training and said, look, here's what I'm going to be doing. I'm not sure exactly the way the whole thing works, but I'll be able to tell you when I get back from training, and I'm going to ask you for referrals. And so I went back to them and got referrals from this network that I had built, and that's how I was able to launch the first group. Vistage also came in at that time and did what they used to call a marketing event, where they would invite prospective members, and so I picked up a couple of members out of that also.
At what point? At what point for you did it start to feel like you're pushing this rock up the hill and you're trying to get all these pieces together? Like at what comfortable is a relative term, but where did you feel in the process that like, hey, I've got traction, I've got this, and things are humming?
Well, I don't think you ever feel that way because, as I'm sure you know, uh, recruiting never stops. Um, and when you least expect it, a member will leave. I've learned, and Vistage will say, all members are temporary. Uh, and I remember when I lost my first member, and that was within my first probably 18 months. I talked to a chair, another Vistage chair or tech chair in Pittsburgh who had been doing it for a while, and I was like beside myself. And the first thing he said to me is, "Don't take it personally." And he said, "It's going to happen." He said, "That's what happens with tech. You lose members, you gain members. You are always recruiting. So I think that's something that really never stops. The good thing for me, and I think for a lot of chairs who have been doing it for a long time, is that now my recruiting is based on getting referrals. I mean, I don't have to cold call or do any of that kind of stuff. I do go to a few networking events and meet people, but primarily it's referral for me.
Are there things that you've learned like from that churn to losing other members? Like I'm sure there's things that are very normal. Like for me, I was in Ned Robinson's group, then Tom Leonard's, then Thomas, then Tom Leonard's again, and then now Gary Brenglass's. And for me, it was either about moving or I put one of the other members on the board of my last company, so there was a conflict, so I had to jump out of that group.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen where folks are selling businesses and things like that. Are there things that like you've noticed and you've started to either vet like before they get through the door, or like different indicators you're looking for where you can try and get them re-engaged before they go?
When sometimes it happens without any foreknowledge,
Mm,
and then other times, they tell you that they're thinking about leaving, and there's a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's financial. Oftentimes it's they sold their company or they're moving on or whatever it is. And yeah, you try to save them, but I realized after a number of years of doing this that um, you can't resell them, I guess is the best way to put it.
yeah.
You can talk to them about why they're leaving and try to um, help them better understand why they should stay, um, but you can't resell them. And once they've made up their mind to leave, um, they'll make up the reason why. They'll rationalize leaving,
Yeah.
and that does happen. But more often than not, it's because of a change in the company, or a financial issue, or they leave, they retire, or whatever.
Vistage changed my life. My first company bankrupted, and in retrospect, it's because I had nobody to lean on, to rely on, to understand like what I should and shouldn't be doing, the things that I should be focused on. I hired all my best friends. I couldn't spell P&L. And so after that bankruptcy, I made myself a promise, and I was like, hey, if I'm ever fortunate enough to find product market fit again, the first thing I'm going to do is go find a group of humans that, meet and talk about business problems. And I didn't know anything about Vistage, and I was separating from active duty service. I've been in for 25 years now. I'm in the reserves today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called a buddy of mine, and he was like, "Oh, I'm in this group." And so I got very lucky because like I stumbled into Ed Robinson's group, and you know he's incredible. Um, it was life changing for me. Being a part of this ecosystem now for the last 9 years. What are some of the things that you see? And it's probably new members that you're bringing through, but like what are some of the early breakthroughs that you have when you've got a new member coming through the door?
Well, before I get to that, I want to say that Ed Robinson and I went through training together.
No way.
Oh yeah, and Ed has changed my life as well. He's a phenomenal human being, just phenomenal. I don't know when he
Yes.
finds the time to do all the things he does, but somehow he does. Um, in terms of the breakthroughs, I mean, there's quite a few that I could talk about, but I think the biggest breakthrough that I see, and it's fairly common with members, is when they begin to realize that they don't have all the answers.
Hmm.
That they've got to, and you experience this in your first company, that if they don't surround themselves with the right people, uh, they're going to have a real problem because they're going to be so tied up in tactical day-to-day stuff that they're not going to be able to visualize where they're going or what they want to become. And so I think that to me is one of the big breakthroughs that members get. And I think it happens with probably 90% of the members. What I find interesting is when I started doing this, I began to realize, having run my own company, small company, but my own company, that the one thing that they all have in common is they don't know what they don't know. And I think Vistage helps them to get clarity around the issues that they're dealing with. And most of the issues, as you well know, are around people, process, sales, marketing, growth. It's never about how to make a better widget.
I used to think about that all the time. I called them I think the three P's, but like people, process, product. And like if you've got the right people, you got the right product, like and the right process, everything else can kind of be solved.
Exactly.
When you talk about the understanding that they don't have all the answers, that takes a certain amount of humility. And for me, that took bankruptcy. Like it took like rock bottom to be like, oh, okay, like I need help. And so, I wasted that traction with the company, and let's not make that mistake again. is this when you think about that breakthrough, like, do these leaders already have to have that mindset, the humility, the open-minded, or is it something that can happen like kind of transformational throughout several meetings where they're like, okay, like now I'm starting to understand, like I don't have all the answers, even though maybe I thought I did.
Well, I think when I interview a potential member, look, they have to they have to understand that they have to want this. I guess is the best way to put it. Um, they have to understand that they not only want it, but they need to have this kind of experience on a monthly basis. Because there are things that they know that they don't know, but there are a lot of things that they don't know that they don't know. Uh, and that's what you get from Vistage. And the fact that you have, as you know, such a diverse group of people and industries in the room, you get points of view that you would never get in an industry organization. So it really is eye-opening. I mean, I've got members probably in my small business CEO group. I have, I think, 45 to 50% of those members have been in for more than 15 years.
Wow.
And they're staying. They're not staying because they're having a good day once a month. They're staying because they're learning something. I've had people that have come into my groups who, when I met them and interviewed them, I thought to myself, this guy has done everything. He's been in private equity. He's run companies. He's got a big job in a huge corporation, and yet same thing. They don't know. They need to learn. They need to get their eyes opened, and they need to understand how to get down to what I would call the mineral rights of these issues that they're dealing with. And that happens in Vistage. You get down to those mineral rights. And there are times when it can be very uncomfortable for the members, I'm sure you've experienced, where they're sweating or whatever in the meeting. But our job as a chair, our job, is to ask the questions that nobody else will ask.
And what was so interesting is, as you were talking about the uncomfortableness, I was thinking about times that I used to sweat in Ed's meetings, and the group that Ed put me in. I think my company at the time might have been like 3 million. We were scaling very, very fast, but we were still very small. And he put me in a group with like 50 to $100 million companies and CEOs, and I just felt like I was kind of beyond my skill set. I mean, of course, I soaked it all up and I learned, but it was a nerve-wracking experience, like that growth and that transformation. When you talk about like, some of the people that you've interviewed, and you're like, they've done it all. Like they've run a business, they've been in this industry, they've done all these different things. How do you start to think about like what group you're going to put them in? Like what does that mean as far as like, are you like, hey, we need diversity of industry over here? Or are you looking for like this person needs these things and this group has strength in those things? Like, how do you think through those types of issues?
I look at a lot of things. I'm sure Vistage has revenue guidelines for the groups, and I look at those. Obviously, they're important, but there's a lot more beyond just the revenue. I think I look at how long they've been in business. I look at what their experience has been beyond their current business, if they've done other businesses. I look at how many employees they have. There's a lot of factors that I look at before I decide whether they should be in a small business group or the bigger CEO group. And I can tell you that I've had people in the bigger group when I don't have that group anymore, but when I had it, I had people in that group whose revenue was under $5 million, but they had enough business experience that's where they belonged. And I have people in my small business group who are way over $5 million in revenue. But that's where they belong because they're entrepreneurs. And to me, the small business group is much more of an entrepreneurial group.
Interesting. And what do you mean by that?
I mean, the people in that group are the people who, in most cases, have started the companies and are running the companies. In the larger groups, you have those people as well, but you also have more hired gun CEOs, uh, things like that. And there is definitely a difference in the way they think about what they're doing.
I agree. There's, and I'm not, I'm just speaking to the differences, not taking anything away from
Yeah,
either of them. It's a different feeling when your livelihood's on the line, and like everything you own is
right.
has already been signed off on. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, look, I kind of like you, but not, I didn't go that far. But when I owned radio stations, we came very, very close to personal bankruptcy. So, I've been down that road, and it's fortunately we didn't have to do it because we found a buyer. But um, it's people in larger companies, like like for example, people that run law firms, large law firms. It's they're responsible for the revenue and the P&L and everything else, but it's not their money.
the owning broadcasts, like how did you get into that?
When I guess I had wanted to be in broadcasting from the time I was about, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. I loved radio. Um, it was in the early days. I don't want to give away my age, but it was the early days of rock and roll, so we listened to radio a lot.
Hmm.
And I majored in communications at Temple University and radio and TV minor. And got my first job at a small UHF TV station in Philadelphia uh, as a mailboy. Um, and then I just kind of worked my way through. I think if you're energetic and you do your job and you're not afraid to take on more responsibility, you can move up in any industry. And that's what I did, and eventually moved up into different departments. I ended up in sales, then became a sales manager, that kind of stuff, and then was working for a national television sales rep firm that was owned by Cox Broadcasting. And I was working in New York, and a friend of mine was with a station. He was sales manager of a station that we represented, and he and I he was in New York on business, and we got to talking one day, and we said, tired of working for other people. Let's do it ourselves. Let's go find some money and buy some radio stations. And we put together a whole business plan. And we went out and raised the money and started buying radio stations, all small market, nothing, no big markets, but small market stations. And it was a great experience. And I have to say, in retrospect, coming that close to a bankruptcy was also a good experience. I think it prepared me for what came later.
You had a business plan, put together money, went and bought. Like what was the, looking back on it now and reflecting, like what did you miss? What did you get wrong? What hypothesis was there where you were like, gosh, if I only would have had like whatever that was?
I think one of the mistakes, I would say it was a mistake, but one of the things that we got wrong, and I'm not sure that we could have known this, but one of the stations that we bought was in Lake Tahoe. It was an AM/FM in Lake Tahoe, and Lake Tahoe is dependent in terms of business climate on retail business because it's a resort. Very few, not many people actually live in Lake Tahoe. It's a ski resort, and in the summer there's things to do as well. Shortly after we bought those stations, and those stations, in terms of our financial breakout of what the stations could do, were really going to be the cash cow for our organization. And we took our business plan to one of the big banks that was working with us, and they put together their own financial plan, and they came probably within 10% of our numbers. So they said, let's do this. And then, shortly after we closed on those stations, California went into a 6-year drought. Um, and over that time, the churn rate for retail in Lake Tahoe reached 45%, because people weren't coming up. There were only, I think, 2 resorts that made their own snow back then. So the lake went down about 11 feet. I mean, there were beaches on Lake Tahoe that never existed before. Um, So it was a pretty bad economic climate, and obviously our projections went down the drain. It was not our cash cow. And we had a station in Kingman, Arizona, where my wife and I were living at the time, and that station was kind of supporting the group, but that station really couldn't afford to support the group. So I think, nobody could have predicted the drought. I think we could have looked at the market a little closer. One of the things that happens when you're in the process of buying a business or starting a business is everybody talks about doing their due diligence, and nobody really does all the due diligence. And I think if we had done a lot more due diligence on the market and what functions in the market and how the economy of the market works, I'm not sure that we would have bought those stations. And we also those stations actually came with another partner. The guy that owned the stations became a partner in our business, and that shouldn't have happened either.
Diligence is really looking for all the reasons that you shouldn't move forward. And like, where's that balance behind, taking an extra month to find that one reason no, or taking the risk? Like, how do you think about that now? Both probably what you see across, your members that might have M&A strategies and your own experiences.
I think there's a couple of things that happen. First, there's an emotional part of this. That is, you can't understate the emotional part of it, because I see it all the time when people are looking to buy a business. They only look at the upside. I had a member who was buying a business with his partner, and I said to him, look, good, bad, or indifferent, if you're going to do this, then you need to have an operating agreement, and you need to have an unwind agreement with your partner, and they were best friends. I said, you may be best friends today, but that can change very quickly if things start to go bad in the company. And that happened. And the two best friends who were actually living next door to each other were no longer best friends. And it became very difficult because they didn't do the operating agreement. And it became a very difficult separation. So I think, I think in terms of the due diligence, I don't think you can do enough due diligence. And it's not just the financials. It's the marketplace, what the future of the market is. Where you want to take the company, and is it possible to get it there? Where you need to cut if you need to cut, where you need to add if you need to add. There's just so much to due diligence but people get emotionally entangled in this, the idea of buying this business and running this business, that they begin to ignore the red flags.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium-sized businesses, because the organizations that can hire and retain world-class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired. I love what you just said there about the financials. Like, yes, the financials are important, but it's not the end all be all. And do you find that there are things inside of the organization that are more important than the financials, or just as important as the financials?
Oh yeah, I think the people are critically important. I think depending on what kind of a company it is, I think the process of how they do whatever it is they do is very important. If it's a manufacturing company, what's the quality of their machinery? Um, how long is this machinery going to last? How old is the machinery? It's all of that stuff. But to me, the people are probably one of the most important things. And what happens is, um, you go in and you interview maybe the top two or three people in the company, and you don't talk to anybody else. And I think, one of the things that we did when we took over a radio station, before we even took it over, I would go in, and my partner would do this as well, and we would sit down with every employee, excuse me. And my one question was, if you owned this radio station tomorrow, what would you do?
Hmm.
And you get some really interesting answers. I had one guy, I'll never forget this, who said to me, well, I think the first thing I do is take the speed bumps out of the parking lot. I swear to you. And I said to my partner after that meeting, I said, well, I know the first speed bump that's going to go. But I think you need to, it does a couple of things. One, it helps you get some sense of the operation of the station or with us radio stations or the company. And two, it kind of gives you a sense of who's really engaged, who's really thinking about what the company is all about and what they're doing there. And I think that's really important. You can't discount people because it's very difficult to change people.
And how do you balance, like when you're going through diligence, and it depends, like it's probably post LOI and like actual diligence, not the loose,
Right.
the loose stuff just to get to a basic valuation assumption. Like at what point should those interviews start, and how do you navigate? Because obviously this is all distractions, and the transaction's not complete yet at that point, and so you're kind of dancing around. So how do you navigate both, like working with current ownership to be like, we have to do these things. Yes, it's going to be a distraction. No, the deal hasn't closed. And yes, this could be like a dependency on the deal closing. Yeah. Like, how do you navigate that?
I think you have to get pretty far down the road in terms of the sale. But I think you just make that part of your due diligence. The owner, the people you're buying from have to know that that's part of our due diligence. We want to talk to the employees, and that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon at all. What's uncommon is that they don't talk to all the employees. Now, if you got 300 employees, that's impossible to do, obviously. Um, but if you talk to not just the C-suite people, you talk to the managers, the department managers, things like that. But I think it has to be part of the process of due diligence.
Going back to when you were rolling up stations, like had you already built your network out at that point because you have already kind of been around the industry and you already kind of had a set list of targets, or did you sit down and create a spreadsheet of every single station across the U.S.? Like, how did you think through that?
We sat down and we knew that we were going to go for small markets. Um, and quite frankly, we looked at Arizona. Now, the first station we bought was in Lynchburg, Virginia. But our business plan was to go to Arizona and buy, because in Arizona you've got Phoenix and you got Tucson, and then everything else is a small town. And we thought, if we bought radio stations surrounding Phoenix and all the small towns and the outskirts of Arizona, we could connect them all and have our own little kind of Arizona network, I guess you'd call it. And our investors loved that idea. We never got to that point, unfortunately. And part of it is that we got distracted by, for example, Lake Tahoe. If we stuck to our plan, we probably would not have bought Lake Tahoe. And so we owned a station, AM/FM in Kingman, Arizona. We owned an FM in Cottonwood, Sedona, Arizona. And we never got beyond those because we bought Lake Tahoe. We had a problem with that station.
What took you off the plan?
what I just talked about. It's the emotional idea of Lake Tahoe. You know, your emotions unfortunately take over you. It's tough to be objective and say, well, this is not the plan. You know, at that time, that those stations were doing very well, um, and nobody could have predicted what happened. But the bottom line is, we shouldn't have bought them to begin with. We should have stuck to our plan.
We've talked a lot about people and people problems. Um, One of the things, my last company, we scaled from 0 to 55 million thanks to Ed and the entrepreneurial operating system and all of these things that came together. Um, and what I realized is like the problems never go away. And that was like a tough lesson. I was like, oh, eventually we'll be big enough and like these things I won't have to worry about. And they're like, no, it was a whole new set of problems, but it was like, it always fell within kind of those buckets.
Right.
What do you see on the people problem side of the equation?
I think you're, look, somebody once said that I love the business, it's the people that's the problem. Um, and you can't run the business without the people, as you know. I think that people problems are always going to be there, but I also believe strongly that you can't just go out and hire people. You've got to use some kind of assessment. The one that I particularly like is predictive index PI, but there are others. That's not the only one. I think you absolutely have to use that kind of help in terms of how you're hiring, because everybody is the best thing that ever came down the pike when they're interviewing for a job. Like the resume, as you look at a resume, oh, what a great resume this is. Well, it's not necessarily the facts. Uh, I think you need to do as much kind of pre-work, which would mean doing an assessment. I've had members who, when somebody applied for a job, the first thing they have them do is a PI. And if the PI didn't match the job, they wouldn't even interview them. That's how strongly they felt about PI. I also think, and you just mentioned this a little while ago, I think companies should get more and more involved in using EOS, because I think it gets people, especially the top people, on the same page in terms of where they're going and what they have to do. And it holds everybody accountable, which is the best part of it, I think. So I think those are two things that are really important in a business. But when you talk about the people part of it, I think if you need to use some kind of an assessment, because it's the old joke. You interview somebody, you hire them, they show up for work, and you look at them and you say, "You're not the person I hired." And that happens a lot. I'm sure you've experienced it. It happens a lot.
I like to talk about like when I got hiring wrong in the past, it wasn't because I couldn't read a resume. It's because like I didn't properly assess that person as a human. And like this doesn't make them a terrible human or a better than, like it's not about that type of spectrum. It's about, are they the right fit for the organization?
Exactly.
And like that's the hardest thing to get right. And we love PI, ran those assessments at last company as well, because it just gives you an indication of like, how do they think, how do they process, and how are they going to fit into the equation while taking out, you've talked a lot about emotion during this, and we were talking about that in relation to M&A. I've been very emotional in hiring decisions. Like if I feel it, I'm like, this person, it's the right person. They come through, I'm like, oh gosh, like shouldn't have listened to the gut on that one.
Right.
Yeah, assessments help you take out that bias.
Yeah, and I think the hiring. A lot of times, a lot of companies hire based on skill. Skill can be taught. Behavior is what's important, and behavior can't be taught.
My former commanding officer always used to talk about this. He would get in front of everybody. He said, there's two things we can't teach here, care and effort. And if you have those two things, then everything else will fall into place. I promise you that. And that was his commitment to everybody, is like, I will ensure you succeed here at this unit if you have those two things.
Right.
So, wow. Okay. Are there, so we talked a little bit about assessments. We talked about kind of the emotional side of it. Are there other things, and whether that's like, I don't know if it's laying the foundation or what it may be, but you know, let's say you got the hiring decision right, you brought them through the door, but you're still having people, like, what are some things that you're seeing inside of organizations, you know, when they thought they got it right, but now there's a people issue.
I think in most cases it's because they don't either they don't have or they don't have the right onboarding process. Somebody comes in and they spend one day with a person who has some sense of what the job is, and then they're on their own. And to me, that's a recipe for disaster. I think I think every company should have a complete onboarding process for every position. I'm saying I don't know this for a fact, but I would say most companies don't. And you hire somebody, even though they've had experience in that particular area, you just can't expect them to walk into a lathe or whatever, a machine or whatever, and just start to work. It doesn't work that way.
I love what you just said there. So there's the Navy put together this whole program called the First 72. And so they've got, you know, decades of analysis on the success or failure from new sailors checking on board a unit. Let's say it's a ship or a squadron. Generally, a sailor spends anywhere from 3 to 5 years at a specific squadron or command or ship, and then they'll go to shore duty or something like that. And what they found is it was all about the first 72 hours. The first 72 hours of that sailor checking on board that ship would be the determination of success or failure for the duration of their tenure on board. And that's like, when you think about, like, all we need to get right is 3 days. If we get the first 3 days right, then the next 5 years are going to be incredible. And they gave two different examples. And this is kind of what they saw was, like, they would see a sailor check on board and they would be walking there, you know, right out of boot camp. They're excited. They've got their Dixie cup on and they walk up and they're like, permission to come aboard. And someone's like, you know, it's a Sunday. And they're like, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you here? You know, and they're like, oh, I'm checking on board. I can't wait. And they're like, well, just go find a rack. You go down that ladder well, go downstairs, blah, blah, blah. And it goes through this whole journey of the sailor. They go down and they get connected with the wrong person. Wrong is in, like, maybe not the stellar sailor. And so, like, you know, the person is now showing them things not to do. And the counterexample to that was, like, checking on board and you know, their supervisor was already meeting them all the way down at the entrance and can't wait to have you. And, you know, your sheets are over here. Let me give you a complete tour of the ship. And that's the determination. So we put something together called the First 90, and we give it to organizations and just say, like, these are some of the things we think you should follow. When you think of an amazing onboarding experience, what are some of those key components?
I think part of the I think one of the things that to me is critically important is that the new person, as part of the onboarding, learns about every department so that they understand that where they're working, how that fits with this and how that fits with this and how it covers the whole. I think that's really important. I think it's just where they're working. Um, I think seeing how they interact with people is incredibly important. It goes back to behavior. By the way, have you ever read the book Turn the Ship Around?
I haven't. I know about the book, but I haven't yet.
You should read that book. I mean, it's about the Navy, and it's a great book. It's a great book. Anyway, I think the onboarding process is more about um, working with people, not necessarily doing that specific job, although that has to be part of it. But I think it's how do you work with people? You know, who are the people you're going to be working with? If there's something that's going on that you need information from another department, you need to know who you're going to have to talk to there. So you have to be part of all of that. You've got to learn all of that and meet those people and understand how what you're doing works with what they're doing.
Hmm.
I don't know of a lot of companies that go that far, to be honest with you.
I'm sure you talk about this inside of your groups as well. Is this something that, like, your suggestion is companies should, if you're hiring or you have people there and you intend to have more people, like, take a week, sit down and, like, map out the entire onboarding process? Or How would you recommend a company kind of get started on that?
I think, to me, I think each department manager should structure an onboarding process for their department.
Hmm.
And then I think if you have an HR manager or somebody on the C-suite, in the C-suite, should put together the overall onboarding program, so that every department is covered. And when somebody walks in, they know exactly what they're going to be doing on day one, day two, day three, day four, week 2, week 3, whatever it is. So that they don't walk in every morning and say, okay, where should I be now? And that happens. And that's how you lose people, as I'm sure you know.
This was a couple of years ago, but one of the feedback that we got from somebody that we placed at an organization was I showed up at day one and nobody even knew who I was or why I was there. And like what recruiting to me is like kind of a 3-phase process. Number one, it's like understanding exactly what you need. And I think for some reason, a lot of organizations skip over that part. They're like, nope, I need an operations manager and that's that. And it's like, well, wait, what type of operations? Is it the fulfillment side, the supply chain side, and like really getting granular instead of copy and pasting job descriptions? And like, if you don't get that right, then you can't do any of the other things right, because you can't go find the right person. So like phase 1, what does the organization need? Phase 2, the actual recruiting, and then phase 3, being onboarding. And the thing that like kills me with this is people spend so much time invested into phase 1 and phase 2, money and time and energy and all of those things, and then completely forget about phase 3. And it was like, you just wasted all that because that person doesn't feel like anybody cares about them. And they might already be looking for a new job at that point. So,
we have a saying at Vistage, and I'm sure you've heard this, hire slowly, fire quickly.
yeah.
And everybody does the reverse. They fire slowly and they hire quickly. And I always tell people, whether you have openings or not, you should always be interviewing. When you lose an employee for whatever reason, whether you need to fire them or they leave themselves, whatever the reason is, you need to have a list of people you can go to immediately to interview for that job. And if you're not out there interviewing people, I would go out and interview people, and I would tell them up front, look, I don't have a job opening here, but I heard some things about you. I'd like to just get to know you, so let's have a cup of coffee. And that if you're doing that on a regular basis, you can fire quickly and hire slowly, because you've done a lot of the process before you actually have the job. You know who the people are that you want to talk to about the job, and I think every manager should be doing that too.
That's what I looked at as my primary job at Hunt to Killer was, when I would go to industry conferences and things like that, like, yes, I was learning and I was meeting folks and things like that. But in the back of my brain, I was always taking special note of people that I think would have been great for the organization, and then kept building on those relationships over long periods of time. Like the COO that we wound up hiring at Hunt to Killer, I had known her for 2.5 years. And like a year in, I convinced her to become like an advisor for us. And it was just about like getting them closer and closer until the organization was ready and they were ready to pull the trigger. So, yeah. So last question here is, you've been around the block for quite some time, in Vistage, and there's going to be Vistage chairs that are listening to this. And like the thing that they're probably very curious of is like, what do you believe has been the key to your success as a Vistage chair over the last couple decades?
Doing the right recruiting, which means I set aside time every week to meet with either a referral source or a potential member. I think you need to be doing that all the time, whether you have an opening in your group or not. I also think when I was a best practice chair here in actually Western Pennsylvania, Northern Ohio for about 9 years, and when new chairs would come in, I would invariably get a call at some point. They would say, "Listen, I've got somebody who I think you could use in one of your groups." And I would say to them, well, why my group? You're trying to build a group. And they would say, well, that person won't fit in my group. And I would say, well, what group are you talking about? You don't have a group. And I think in the back of their minds, they begin to self-select people out because they don't think they're the right industry. Could be a lot of things. And I would tell them, you can't do that. If the person it could be a good Vistage member, you need diversity in your group. So why wouldn't you bring this person in? Unless you have a personal issue with them, and that's obviously a whole different story. And I think that I think what's to me the sweet spot for Vistage is issue processing, and I think chairs have got to issue process in a compelling way. The issue processing is it's not like being a consultant. The issue processing is to get deep down inside, most members want to stay up here, as I'm sure you know, and you got to get them down here because that's when it all really begins to happen. And I think Vistage chairs have got to, and I'm sure most of them do, but I'm sure there's some that are afraid to go there. And you can't. You've got to take the risk of losing a member, and it won't happen probably. To take them down to the gut level of whatever their issue is, because you can rationalize and you can intellectualize, I guess, any issue you want, but until you get it down to the emotional level, you're not really solving anything.
What's like a key there? When someone comes and they're processing an issue, you talked earlier about asking questions, making sure that you're not kind of inserting yourself. So I'm sure there's a lot of like building the right environment for this to happen. What do you think is kind of that key to effectively processing issues?
I think part of the chair's job as the facilitator is to make sure the group is going there. And I will say, I need to put my member's hat on for a minute. And I'll either say, there's an elephant in the room. Does anybody know what it is? Or I will say, what about this? And then turn it back to the group. Because once you open that door, they'll go. But you got to get the door open. I'll ask, there's an elephant in the room. And people will come up with whatever they think it is. And sometimes they know what it is. Sometimes I have to tell them what it is. But I try not to do that very often. But if I feel it's necessary, I'll do it. Because to me, if we don't get down to the emotional level of the issue, then we're not really solving for anything. That makes sense?
It makes total sense. And I felt like that was the mic drop moment. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on and taking a flyer on this. This is a project that's like near and dear and special to me. Just EOS and Vistage, those were the two things that changed my life. And on the Vistage side, it was the business coaching that comes along with that, and then the peer group where you're processing issues. And so it was like those three things, two of them were covered by Vistage. And so this project is near and dear to my heart. So I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to come on and share your journey, share your experiences, and share your wisdom.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed it.